Welcome back, JJK fans! The 259th chapter of one of your most awaited series has finally been released, and I am pretty sure you are excited to see this one. Well, ignoring the fact that this episode is tear-jerking, to say the least. If you watched our spoilers review, I know that you are well aware of what will happen in this entire chapter, although you may have regretted not enjoying the ignorance for a few more days. Well, if you're new to the channel and missed the said video, consider yourself lucky because the feelings of grave sadness engraved in this chapter will haunt you a few hours later compared to others. Enough with the blabbering. Today we will review Jujutsu Kaisen's chapter 259 and go over the events that led up to Todo's return and CHOSO's permanent leave in the JJK universe. Surprised? We'll get into those parts later in the video. So without further ado, let's hop on to chapter 259. Previously, Sukuna summoned his incomplete malevolent shrine and wreaked destruction on the battlefield with his domain. Gege also revealed Yuji's replacement training with other sorcerers. One is Kusakabe, who taught Yuji to cast a simple domain and use it as a barrier to defend against his uncle's attacks. The other character will also be revealed later, so please look forward to that. Going back, just when Yuji thought that they could survive the King of Curses domain expansion, which, to be fair, they actually did, Sukuna followed up his attack with a terrifying furnace open, and that's where the cliffhanger begins. The first page starts with a flashback somewhere in the 1-month time skip. Here we can see Yuji, CHOSO, and Kamo in the middle of the discussion about blood manipulation. Yuji's dialogue in the second panel confirms that the participants of the switch training are actually decided. We already know from chapter 258 that Yuji's first partner is Kusakabe, to whom he learned simple domain, as well as the sorcerer's own method of cursed energy manipulation. Here, Yuji says, it looks like I'll be doing switch training with Okutsu and Kusakabe. Therefore, the mystery person turns out to be none other than Yuta. Some predicted it to be Gojo, but I think that's just the wishful thinking of the fans, who are in grave need of Gojo hopium. Trust me, I didn't wish for that at all. Yeah, I didn't. Anyway, I think it's safe to assume that the skill Yuji learned from his senpai was the reversed curse technique. However, if that's the case, then Yuji should also be able to heal others, right? This theory stems from the fact that Yuta can cure other people with his reversed curse technique, thanks to his rare ability to produce or release positive energy. A great example of this healing skill would be the scene in chapter 141, where Yuta pierced Yuji's heart to deceive the higher-ups into thinking that he really put an end to Yuji as they ordered. We then see in chapter 143 that Yuji wakes up perfectly alive since Yuta healed him immediately with the reversed curse technique. That said, take this theory with a grain of salt because nothing is confirmed yet. So far, we haven't seen Yuji healing other than himself too. Moving on, Kamo teaches Yuji what blood manipulation and convergence basically are. He also explained it in simpler terms so Yuji could understand it more easily. Man, he even compared the basics of blood manipulation to urinating, which is hard not to laugh at. Of course, CHOSO also wants to teach Yuji something, as he urges his little brother to ask him how to cast Supernova. Unfortunately, Kamo is against it because he plans for Yuji to use blood manipulation only to stitch his wounds and stop the bleeding of sudden injuries. In essence, blood manipulation was meant to serve only as a pain reliever for Yuji. Therefore, CHOSO can only pout as he is unable to help his younger brother at the training, not to mention that this big bro is apparently bad at teaching. However, keep this scene in mind since this page will be a large part of the narrative as the chapter continues. The flashback ends as the narrator then explains the logic behind Sukuna's furnace, saying he can only use it after preparing the ingredients, referring to cleave and dismantle. This is a bit like slicing food considering there was a theory revolving around Sukuna being compared to a chef. You know, with the slashes, fire, and keeping Uraume like a living refrigerator. That said, I think the wording here just fueled that conversation. Sukuna is also revealed to have imposed a binding vow on himself to make up for the lack of speed and range of his destructive ability. Specifically, the binding vow declares, outside of his domain, the furnace cannot be used on multiple targets. In addition, The King of Curses temporarily changed the specifications of the barrier, limiting entry only to living beings. This allows him to keep the malevolent shrine's area of effect without reducing the output of his cursed energy. Put simply, every object that has been turned into dust by Sukuna's domain expansion will obtain an explosive energy equal to that of furnace. With that said, however, the King of Curses can only fire the ability to only one person. Uram claims victory as Sukuna shoots the flame arrow. The next panel showcases the mayhem brought by the King of Curses' attack, the ultimate technique that instantaneously annihilated Mahoraga with one blow in Shibuya. The heat of the furnace brings forth explosive high-temperature detonations which instantly compress and decompress the shockwaves, leading to the demise of every living being inside the domain. Man, this totally turned into Sukuna Kaisen. On top of that, Urame and Hikari appear again without even a sneak peek at their ongoing battle, which we last saw in Chapter 245. Moreover, the appearance is just for the former to say, "This is our victory." This is insane. Furthermore, it turns out that the reason why Sukuna only uses Furnace now is because the ability remained cooled during the entirety of his battle against Gojo. This is due to Sukuna continuously altering the conditions for his barrier techniques, and is probably thanks to his repeated use of binding vows. Well, he reaps what he sows for becoming a binding vow merchant. But just imagine what would happen if Sukuna opens the furnace in the early stages of the showdown. Going back, before the flame arrow could hit Yuji, CHOSO creates a barrier using blood manipulation to protect his brother from the massive damage. Unfortunately, the one who receives the attack instead is CHOSO, who slowly turns to ashes. Yuji is definitely shocked as he can only watch while his older brother gradually ceases into nothingness. I mentioned earlier that the flashback of the blood manipulation training is connected to the following events, and that is because CHOSO apologizes to Yuji for not being useful at that time. The fire eventually envelops CHOSO, which causes extreme grief to hit Yuji as we can see the shine in his eyes fading. Wow. He absolutely doesn't want to lose another important person anymore, but Yuji is coincidentally hoarding the majority of the sufferings in the series. The next page transports the brothers into the imaginary soul world that we already saw in the past. However, this time, Eso and Kechizu are nowhere to be seen around the table. CHOSO compliments Yuji for learning the reversed curse technique faster than him, but the little brother knows it is all Sukuna's fault. Still, CHOSO smiles at Yuji, proud of him, saying it's natural for younger siblings to surpass the older ones. CHOSO also mentions owing Tsukumo an apology since he has to leave Yuji alone again, given that this is the end of the line for him. This is a reference to Chapter 208 at CHOSO and Tsukumo's bar date, where the former opens up to the latter. At that time, Tsukumo reminds CHOSO that Yuji will be by himself again if he sacrifices himself at some point in the battle. Regrettably, this is that exact moment. Yuji emphasizes that it is more than enough that CHOSO was there for him at his worst. CHOSO looks surprised hearing that as he gets struck by a realization after talking to imaginary Eso and Kechizu. Here, he realizes that the 150 years they spent together were only just a few days for Yuji. After all, this is where their moment together ends. On the next page, CHOSO's face becomes unrecognizable as he finally leaves his last words. "Thank you, Yuji, for being my little brother." As the barrier dissipates, so does CHOSO's life as he bids his permanent goodbye to his younger sibling. Man, just what in the world is this emotional scene? In the end, Yuji can only mutter, "Thank you, big brother." He's not even sure if CHOSO can still hear him. It might be a more fitting end if CHOSO's ears caught those words, though. On the bright side, CHOSO meets his demise successfully protecting Yuji, something that he failed to do in Eso and Kechizu's case. However, there's no time to grieve. Afterward, Yuji faces the battlefield outside the now destroyed barrier. The buildings turned into rocks and debris, and the vaporized substances became smoke, blinding his field of vision. When he could finally see the surroundings clearer again, Yuji was shocked that none of his companions were in the area. Well, there's the figure of someone walking closer to him. and I will reveal who that person is in a minute. However, for now, I want to talk more about how much impact CHOSO's demise affected Yuji. At this point, he's convincing himself that he is a cog in a machine, a part that would serve its purpose no matter what the circumstances. The narrator mentions that Yuji's initial goal was to repay CHOSO for sacrificing his life to protect him. However, the scorched earth before his eyes shook the foundation of his determination and threw it into nothingness. Eventually, Uncle Sukuna emerges from the smoke to remind his poor nephew that there's still an all-out smackdown awaiting him. Yuji's reaction here fills with anger as soon as he sees Sukuna, hinting that his motivation, which was crushed earlier, might be burning again. All of a sudden, however, Yuji's attention shifts to something else, the shadow behind the blurry battlefield, who turns out to be none other than Aoi Todo. Now, it is the brother and best friend who returns after who knows how many chapters. This is big since we last saw Todo way back in his fight against Mahito during the Shibuya incident arc. We can also notice that Todo has a bandage in his hand. Remember, he lost it in the aforementioned battle in the past, so we assumed at that time that Todo's innate technique, Boogie Woogie, had also disappeared in the process. There's a short explanation about this in the upcoming flashback, since I'll tell you right now, Boogie Woogie is related to why Maki, Miwa, and Ino can no longer be seen in the battlefield when Yuji pops out from CHOSO's destroyed barrier. In the flashback, it is revealed that Mei Mei and Todo plan to use the crows and Boogie Woogie to evacuate their teammates away from Sukuna's domain. Basically, Todo will use his technique to swap the places of Maki and the others, with the crows waiting outside the barrier. For this plan to succeed, however, Todo must expand the effective range of Boogie Woogie. This will be difficult given the case of his arm. But apparently, Todo can still feel the pulse of the technique, confirming that it might not be lost at all, and there must be a fight where we can witness its battle prowess again. That said, Todo warns Mei Mei not to let Yuji know about the plan no matter what. Regarding why, Mei Mei calls it resonance, and it is significantly related to Sukuna and Itadori's deep connection, considering that they shared the same body once. I also want to mention that resonance is Nobara's signature move, and it is simply interesting that they have the same wording. It enables her to curse the enemy with the help of a straw doll as a catalyst for the technique's activation, which also acts as a proxy to establish a connection with the target and executes them with a hammer and nails. Considering that they are about connection, I assume that they follow the same principles. Here, they also mentioned that the mission back in Yasuhachi Bridge was triggered by the resonance between the finger Yuji ate and Sukuna's lost finger. Therefore, they fear that if Yuji knows the plan, it could accidentally leak information to Sukuna. Of course, Mei Mei agrees to keep her mouth shut in the name of her wallet and bank account. Still, even though this plan is good on paper, Todo is unsure if he can guarantee the safety of his friends. Moreover, it'll be impossible for him to save Yuji and CHOSO, who are in the center of the incomplete malevolent shrine. The flashback ends afterward, and Todo can only apologize to Yuji. Maybe because he couldn't rescue CHOSO, or it is just impossible to tell him the specific details of what's happening. Instead, Todo shouts that everyone is most likely fine, assuring Yuji that there's nothing to worry about. Well, except for the fact that Yuji can't even grieve the loss of his real brother. Nonetheless, this pumps Yuji up, and he convinces himself to believe in Todo because he can't really afford to do anything besides that right now. You can also notice the narrator building up tension at this point, mentioning the words, "Why you ask?" and "because" in the final pages of the chapter. That is due to the revelation that the King of Curses, after the domain expansion, is in a state where it's difficult to use the curse technique. The chapter ends with Yuji and Todo preparing to take on Sukuna, who is suffering from curse technique burnout. Now, does this mean that the King of Curses will resort to hand-on-hand combat? We saw in the past how great of a tandem Yuji and Todo are. Hence, I won't hesitate to say that Sukuna Kaisen won't be seen in the following episode, or at least in the next chapter. Of course, I might be wrong. Aside from that, Todo can be seen removing the cloth that wraps around his lost arm, hinting that he might be hiding something, like a cursed tool, that will allow him to activate his technique more easily. I want to know your theories about this part, so drop a comment below, and I'll make sure to respond to every interesting comment or question I will stumble upon. Fortunately, we don't have to wait for so long since there is no mention of a break next week. Man, I am really excited to see another Yuji Todo battle, especially if it is against the King of Curses this time. Anyway, thanks for sticking at the end of the video. Subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed the coverage of the latest chapter, and don't forget to hit the like button. That's all for now, and see you in the next episode.